Well, hello everyone. My name is Timothy Wenger, and I'm really looking forward to this series. But first of all, I want to introduce you to Dr. Daniel P. David, a psychotherapist and friend of mine. But he is starting a menslifeinstitute.org, which is essentially we're focusing on creating content for you guys that helps you in day-to-day life and diving into deeper subjects. And so I'm just really looking forward to this, but also just wanted to warmly welcome everyone who's tuning in. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'd like to plug you a little bit if you don't mind. And, I
Sure.
thank you for uh, wanting to do these interviews with me. I
Yeah.
think that I've heard some good things from other guys who have watched your Man Effect interview on YouTube. And obviously you've had some really good success there with talking to lots of individuals, a lot of particularly
Yeah.
men. So I just really appreciate the work you're doing with the Man Effect, and I'm glad that we're able to talk about men's issues today, and we're going to continue to do this for a while anyways. So
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to our discussions, and hopefully the guys that listen to this program will be able to get something out of it, and they'll feel that uh, you know their issues are being addressed, and maybe in
Yeah.
the future they'll be able to get some help as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And I guess to give a little context of who I am too, uh,
Sure.
my website is themaneffect.com, but I'm just very devoted to creating materials to help men as well out in day-to-day life. And so that's why I was just very excited to do this series with you. So anyway, I think we should just get the ball
Sure.
rolling here.
Sure. Absolutely.
The topic of this interview and conversation is around identity,
Hmm.
and I think it'd be really good just to kind of um, give some background as to why you wanted to discuss this specific topic.
Well, I've been working with men for about 35 years, and
Mhm.
I've not been a therapist for 35 years. Probably have been a therapist for about 15 of those 35 years. The first 20 years, I did a lot of work with young men in New York City, and especially in the streets of New York with kids who had lots of problems with being in gangs and being recruited by gangs in New York. This was back in the 80s and the 90s. So it was a really serious problem back then.
Yeah.
And then when after doing that, I decided to have a life change of my own. And I started working on myself in therapy. And then I decided that, that would be a good career change for me
Hmm.
because I felt the impact that it made on my life. And I had always taken counseling to the streets in New York. I used to call it coffee shop counseling. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun too. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd meet guys at the middle of the night in some diner somewhere in, Queens, Bayside, or Brooklyn. And so it was a lot of fun. But I decided, well, I could continue on, and then got involved with going back to graduate school, and then started working and thinking about men and men's issues.
Hmm.
And identity is so central to who we are that we don't realize it
Yeah.
until it gets hurt and until something happens. And then we sort of get confused about who are we and what's going on with our lives. So I often use the analogy that identity is like the ship. You could have $1 million yacht floating on the ocean, but if it doesn't have a rudder or the rudder is broken, it's just going to float aimlessly, on the ocean. And so,
Oh,
identity is core to who we are. It is that rudder, if we can use that metaphor,
yeah.
for making decisions and for uh, really understanding who we are and the direction we want to go in our lives, and for determining what our lives are all about and the meaning of our lives. So when we begin to really look at male identity, it's important to understand all the aspects of male identity and how we can be wounded. Definitely, I've seen so many guys over the years who come in and they're really struggling with their identity, but they don't know it in the beginning. They just think they're having problems and they don't quite understand why they're having problems.
Hmm.
But when I get down to it, we look at identity there.
Yeah. So like, what are some of those like signals that you're struggling with your identity?
One signal or a couple signals here are, depression and a lot of self-doubt, a lot of lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem. When guys come, usually they've had some problem or crisis going on, and it's kind of hit their self-esteem and self-worth. So it's one of those things when I get phone calls, and I do phone consultations, and I'll ask them, tell me what caused you to reach out, and when they do, it's usually, I'm feeling anxious. I can't sleep at night. I'm not eating too well, or I'm overeating, or I'm oversleeping, or not sleeping. I'm having depression. I'm not getting out anymore. I feel isolated. All of these things are real symptoms of something's going on the inside. And then, often a lot of these guys get into a crisis situation before they will actually, make that call. Yeah. And so it's one of those things that you can kind of tell from the very beginning, the first conversation, that something's happening there.
Would you say too, like in my observation with men who struggle with identity, they lack let's say a purpose or a vision for their life? Do you think that's a common thing too?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, one thing about identity, we can have a change in our identity, and we should have a change in our identity all through our lives. As we grow, hopefully we're getting wiser and smarter, and, things will begin to shape us, and we'll begin to take on different aspects of our identity. But one thing that I find that most guys who are struggling with their identity, maybe they're, not quite, they haven't quite found themselves. They haven't really found who they really are. And so a lot of that work is around purpose and meaning in their lives. And they really have to work on that, but sometimes they get lost. And I think that's where I meet most guys, is when they're lost. They're, like, they'll tell me, I don't have any purpose or any direction in my life. And I'll say, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. And what's scary about that too, I mean, all of these areas, depression, self-doubt, self-worth, purpose, meaning, they're all very scary parts of humanity to address, especially when you don't feel equipped or know what to do. So I personally empathize with that a lot.
Yeah, guys actually come in and they'll say, I feel so lost and I don't know what to do. And of course, for men, we have a lot of pressures in our society to perform and to have a good job, have a good career, have good relationships.
Yeah.
And so we can get really lost when we don't really know who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's really a next crucial part for this conversation would be to actually define what identity is.
Well, identity is core to ourselves, who we are. So the question of who am I is the beginning of understanding our identity. And of course, there are things that we can relate to. So for example, I'm a man, I'm a father, I have my son, and then, I'm a therapist, and I might be interested in certain sports like soccer. I like, our team over here, Atlanta United. And then of course in England, I love the Manchester United group or club. So, so, we got all these things that, you could have like a bunch of patches all over you that say, okay, this is who I am. It's kind of like, that's how we sort of collect these things and they become a part of our identity. But it also entails our personality traits and types. And then our physical appearance is part of our identity, our mental health status, our attitudes, our beliefs, our expressions, how we express ourselves. Sometimes we can be very, rigid in our expressions. That's part of, maybe being a stoic man, or, we can be comical and fun. It just, it's how we see ourselves. So it's kind of like this, we're in the world of selfies, and it's to me, it's like taking a bunch of selfies or having this one selfie that we carry around with us that gives us an idea of who we are and what we look like and how we interact with people. So identity,
Yeah.
again, impacts our relationships with people, especially our significant relationships, as well as, you know, how we relate to others at work or on a career path, or, you know, some
Sure.
sort of interest that we have. So these are central to our identity.
So what I hear you saying throughout all of this, and as you kind of, what's the word? Paint an image of what identity is. Man, I hope you guys can't hear that train going by.
I thought it was great background music there, or sound effects.
But anyway, it's a little distracting. But what's interesting about, as you're painting this image of what identity is, it makes me think about how crucial it is for us to be very self-aware and self-reflective, and how much that plays a role in being aware of our identity.
Right. If we're not aware of it, or we just kind of piece things together and we don't really have a solid core sense of self, I think that's what causes men especially to have difficulty with confidence and self-esteem.
Yeah.
You know, because they don't have a solid core of beliefs. I mean, you know, things like culture, language, our own personal history, you know, those things are important to
Sure.
our identity. But within all of that, we have to have our own set of beliefs and our own set of, you know, our sense of the world and who we are in the world and how we interact in our world. And again, identity determines that. And if we don't have that solid sense of an authentic self, like who am I really? Not just my public self. It's like what I present to the world, but how do I really feel about myself on the inside? And somehow, often, you know, especially when I talk to men, their true authentic self is actually not the way they act in public. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, then that causes a lot of confusion. It's like, well, they become the performer on stage,
Mm-hmm.
and they show one part of themselves, one aspect of who they are, particularly their projected, you know, this projection that they want everyone to believe that they're this way. But then off stage, and when they're not performing, they have a totally different mindset, and that causes a lot of conflict and a lot of confusion for men. So I'm really trying to work with men around finding their authentic selves, and then being authentic in the sense of their public and their private self. Somehow in between, in the middle of that, is where they really are, and allow themselves to be more authentic with their friends and family and people that love them, especially people that love them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. I guess, to be honest, this isn't a topic that I've really spent a lot of time specifically focusing on. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I'm trying to do is project myself into like the earlier stages of personal development. And so I'm wondering, like, if I felt insecure about my identity or didn't know much about my identity, where could I start as a man to work on that?
Well, obviously family is really important. And, you know, let's be honest, a lot of guys have had maybe come with some difficulty with family, and maybe
Yeah.
they're you know, struggling with their family identity. So, but that is the beginning. At least we have to understand, you know, what sort of family we were born into, what sort of circumstances they were in, you know, what our parents and grandparents, how they lived and what they stood for. And we may be counter to that. We may actually not agree with a lot of that, but it's important to understand where we're coming from. And then, you know, I ask guys, ideally, who are you? What do you want for your life? What do you really need for your life? What is it that would bring you happiness and joy and a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning? And
Mm-hmm.
when I ask those questions, that's when we start to kind of look inward. And this work is really about looking inward and really understanding who we are and what we want and how we want to live our lives to the fullest. So that's a question these are some of the questions that I start to ask guys. You know, who are you really? not just who are you in public, but who are you really underneath all of that?
Hmm. Yeah. And are you holding yourself back? Or are you hiding? And
Right.
yeah,
A lot of guys, they don't even know. They'll say, well, I don't really know the answer to this question. And
that's good.
of course, they're in shock a little bit because they thought they knew who they were, but deep down inside, they haven't really had a relationship with themselves. And so
Mhm.
therefore, they don't really know who they are. They're cut off from their emotions, cut off from their feelings, a lot of times they're shallow thinkers, as I call it. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as, a fact. It's like, what's happening out here as opposed to what's happening in here.
Yeah.
And they're only thinking about what's happening inside when they are reactive. And that's usually the problem. It's what brings them into therapy is
Yep.
they're just reactive. They're not actually understanding why they feel this way or why they're behaving. So they'll come in and say, I got anger problems, but in reality, I'm looking at them and saying, well, deep down inside, you might have a lot of wounds and, might have this wounded identity, and you're protecting your wounds. It's kind of like an animal, that's been wounded. It doesn't want to let you touch it and try to help it. It's going to bite
Yeah.
you, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. It makes me think like once you get to a place where you're not doing reactive movements too, like even for myself, I do exercises like where I ask myself, um, how would you put it? Like lies that I believe. And it's amazing to me when I take the time to be self-reflective and ask myself questions like that, how much it reveals to me about myself, and how much growth I need. But yeah,
Right.
I don't know.
Absolutely. That's the way to do it. It's like we all have to kind of dig a little deeper and
Oh yeah.
work through this stuff. It's really important to do that. And eh, again, I get a little bit, sometimes it's sad, I should say, and sometimes comical when guys come in and they really, they look at you like you're asking them, something that, the safe to their, the combination to the safe in their bank. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't know, I'm not going to share that with you. I'm like, well, you need to really look at this because this is a real problem,
Mhm.
and they are so closed off that they don't even realize that they're having these problems around their identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're very protective.
I
It's
mean,
amazing.
it's an uncomfortable place to be in if you haven't been there before.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm very compassionate, and, I tell guys when they come in, I'm not here to judge.
Sure.
I'm really just here to, you know, help them, guide them through some self-discovery and to really work through their issues so that they can actually feel better about themselves and learn to have a better relationship with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love it. Um, I was thinking, what if we jumped into, you kind of had done a sketch, like almost a mind map of identity.
Okay,
Are
that
you
sounds
okay with
good. Can you
looking
do
at that?
that? Your technical skills are better than mine.
Yeah. I'm going to bring it up here. Just let me know if you
All
can
right, I can see
see
that.
it.
Yes.
Um, I'm not sure.
So if you go off to at the top, male identity, and then you look at the core to the self-image,
Yeah.
and this internal image of who am I, and then it's really self-recognition, and then you have like the culture and language and history that a person um, grew up in. And you
Oh yeah.
notice I put little identity theft. Why is identity theft so crucial in our world? Well, identity is very valuable, and it's very important. It's like who we are, and when people steal our identity, they get to be who, they get to play into playing around with our identity or misusing our identity. So
Yeah.
if you think about identity theft as being such a core issue for Americans today or people in the world,
Yeah.
then that says something about identity itself, right?
Hmm.
And then you have this identity that, again, it's who am I? So you have the meaning and purpose and direction for living and a fulfilling life. And then you have
What are you
this,
talking about over here? Yeah.
yeah, right there. Yeah.
You want
And
me
then,
to
of
go
course,
down?
personality traits and types. And then you have all the physical appearance in that, right?
Yeah,
So, and I think you should look at the drive and motivation. Guys
this section right
who
here.
struggle with having a motivation in life and drive, usually it's because they don't know who they are and what they really want. So they're not really pressing themselves to go in any direction. So that's why they come to me and feel stuck. And I think that's really a problem for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
It affects
So
their decision making, especially.
yeah, and their self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence. Yeah.
Right, right.
Wow.
So, and if you see off to the side of the drive and motivation, you see passions, and then,
Oh
things
yeah.
worth sacrificing for. Fill in the blank. What are when we have a real identity, we're going to be able to say, okay, these are things that I really want in my life, and
Mm.
these are things that are worth sacrificing for.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
And when guys don't have that, it's usually because they don't know who they are.
Yeah, and that seems to stem from your values too, because
Right.
when you have your values defined, you know what you're willing to sacrifice for.
Right. Absolutely.
So then over here under the male identity column, you got problems with identity, authentic.
Right. Identity diffusion is not, not quite coalescing of the identity. So a lot of this happens in adolescence, but it can carry on into the early 20s. And some guys can carry it on for quite a while, which often leads to the identity confusion. And then that's where the problem of lacking maturity. You and I have talked about this in the past, and this won't be a part of this show, but that's where people come in and talk about toxic masculinity, which I don't like the term. I don't think it's a healthy term. I don't think it's a good term.
Yeah.
But what are we really talking about? We're talking about men who lack maturity, and then there's the whole identity from boyhood to manhood. It's really about being initiated into manhood versus uninitiated. And so when we see bad behavior or behavior that we see in public, it's often these are uninitiated men, so they haven't really developed that maturity, and they haven't been really taken through a process of identifying with other men, so that they understand that they have responsibilities as men, and that they should they have roles as men, and they can fulfill their identity through these roles as well. So
Yeah.
then that's when you get, all the anxiety, depression, lack of
Yeah.
direction, and self-doubt, right?
Which directly influences your life. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, directly.
And when we're talking about initiated and uninitiated, it makes me reflect upon something you harp a lot, which is the hero's journey.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
it's like the acceptance or the willingness to pursue that drive within us rather than to cower in the face of fear and the unknown.
Absolutely. The hero's journey to me is, I use it in my therapy with guys because it's almost like a roadmap for overcoming our fears and really dealing with change and impact affecting change in our lives. So if you're listening to this podcast, if you haven't read any of Joseph Campbell's works, I would recommend it highly.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just taking some notes.
It's okay. Go ahead and take notes. You you can always rewind the video.
No.
Okay. No. All right.
I would plug too that the hero's journey has been a very crucial imagery for me to hold to.
Mm-hmm.
Dark times, and like as you know, I've been going through some hell of my own, and it's
Right.
that's been a very encouraging point of reference for me, to not only go through the journey but also to hold to myself and build up on my own confidence of like, I've been through stuff similar to this. I'm gonna be fine. I have friends or whatever it is. It's just
Sure.
it's fascinating how realizing that cycle instills a confidence within me. So
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's a narrative that we can use to recreate our own story
Mm-hmm.
and build an identity over a period of time. And a really healthy identity isn't something you just put on,
No.
going out to a goth party, um, or, being,
Yeah.
in a hunting suit somewhere. Um,
I'm a lumberjack.
what?
Or I'm a lumberjack. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a lumberjack, like, I mean, clothing, I suppose, helps, but
Yeah.
overall, a healthy man's identity or male identity is developed over time, and
Yeah.
it's molded and shaped, right? And I think that the hero's journey offers a great mapping for that journey, for that development.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, for me, I would be curious to hear some practical steps or exercises maybe that men can do around identity and just personal development, specifically on this topic or in this area.
Well, I give some homework. Often when I work with men, I will give them homework. The first thing I would encourage men to do is to sit down quietly by themselves, meditate on the question, who am I?
Hmm.
And maybe do something like a mind map that we just showed, something about, identifying different aspects of who they are and how they culminate into the person that they are. And then,
Yeah.
and then decide, okay, what's missing? What do I need to change?
Yeah.
What's going on in my life? What do I need to heal? Are there any wounds that I need to heal?
Yeah.
And just kind of journal it out. I think journaling is a great way to begin this process.
Absolutely.
And,
I second that notion. Sorry.
yeah. I'm glad I got a convert already. Okay, good. So, it's the whole idea is that we need to get this stuff out and get
Yes.
really in touch with it. And then I encourage guys to read books. I'm a big fan of the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover as a good foundation of understanding the difference between initiated and uninitiated men, and the different archetypes of male archetypes. And I'm certain there are more than what's in that book, but that book kind of sets out a good foundation. And then there's a book that I use and often ask guys to read. It's called To Be a Man, and that's by Robert Masters. And that's an excellent book for developing a foundation. But let's say if they got some real concerns and they're really feeling wounded or hurt or lost or confused, or maybe just afraid to look at themselves, I recommend that they get into therapy. I think therapy is a wonderful thing for men to get into. Now, I would encourage them to make sure that the therapist that they're, wanting to work with has a real understanding of men and is coming from a male positive, male affirming
Mm-hmm.
perspective. I mean, there's a lot of therapists out there, and I'm not bashing therapists. I think therapists are great. I have lots of friends that are therapists, but not everybody is skilled in this area. So rather than just going to some generalized individual, maybe you want to check out their feelings and their thoughts and their beliefs around men and manhood. And if they, I will give a warning. I know this isn't going to be popular, but if they ascribe to toxic masculinity, I would really have a problem with that, because I think that's coming from a perspective that kind of pathologizes masculinity and men, and it makes it as though they've got some disease that needs to be cured. I think that a male positive, a male affirming therapist understands that men have issues just like women do, and that it isn't about pathologizing those traits or those issues. It's about understanding that these are some aspects of who they are. Even our shadow work, eventually we'll do a video on shadow work, but even our shadow is something that we don't want to discard or push away. We want to embrace. So even those wounded, I've worked with guys for 20 years, my first 20 years, who people would have ascribed as toxic masculinity, but in reality, I just saw a lot of hurt boys,
Yeah.
and and there were wounded boys and wounded men. So I think male positive, male affirming therapists understand that.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to
Okay.
preach, but
No?
you know, it's my world and I see it all the time. So I
Yeah.
do try to help men.
Yeah. I think what I would just add is just that this is a process and journey, and that it's not going to be a 1 month awakening. Like obviously this is a lifelong maintenance and work. And so journaling, therapy, there's men's retreats. There's all sorts of tools and things you can try out there to help that growth. And so I just want to bring that realistic side that this isn't an issue that you'll just fix overnight. Um,
Right. Right.
and
If so, we'd be millionaires right now
I know,
because
right?
we would just like, you know, here, have something, and we'll fix your problem. But
Maybe we should just lie and say that that's how easy it is.
oh, well, that'll really ruin it.
Sorry.
It's
Oh,
okay. It's okay. He's joking, guys. He's joking. All right.
that was my sarcasm.
I like your sarcasm. I'm from the Northeast. We have lots of that up there.
Well, I think that's a good spot to close. I think, guys, just to kind of recap, journal, therapy, read King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or To Be a Man, or both. Look into the hero's journey.
Right.
Just kind of get really self-exploratory and tap into the areas that you're scared to look into. And what you'll find is a different type of personal confidence or self-confidence. So
Absolutely. You know, some guys are afraid to look at themselves because they're afraid of, they think they'll think of themselves as a weak. It takes a strong, courageous man to look at himself. And I believe that you'll never regret it. So, begin today if you can.
yeah, something I try to encourage people to as well in conversations I've had is that when they're overwhelmed by the circumstances in their life, I'm like, right now is the opportunity for you to overcome something, and you have the capability to overcome it, even though it seems overwhelming. And so it's like in my own life, just hitting levels of loneliness or insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
When I face them and work through them, it makes me so much more confident and so much more secure in myself rather than running away from it. So
Absolutely.
I just
Yeah,
want to,
that's absolutely true. And I know that men are lonely out there. So it's
yeah,
important when we get when we start to have a relationship with ourselves, and then we have a better time having relationships with others. And so this is a
absolutely.
process of having a relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so for everyone who's watching, if you enjoyed this show, a couple things I would love for you to do: hit the subscribe button if it's there somewhere.
Right. Usually around there somewhere, or maybe
Um,
up
hit
there.
hit that if you think it's interesting or valuable information, please share it. And also, if you have any questions, just comment or shoot us an email. This is something that we love and care about deeply.
Absolutely.
And so, just a reminder that this is Dr. Daniel P. David, and he's from Men's Life Institute, which also just put a .org on the end there. And my name's Timothy Wenger, and I'm from The Man Effect. And I just really appreciate you tuning in and watching till the end.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it too.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.